Hello everyone, welcome to the 22nd iOS tutorial. In this tutorial we'll talk about an important subject in iOS development, which is auto layout. How we can set up elements inside of the view that we can have different and great shape in different situations. So we will talk about constraints, which are X, Y, width and height, and some buttons for auto layouts, which are align, pin, and resolve auto layouts. So let's move on. Okay, let's create a new project. This is the first time we are creating a new project in Xcode 6. It is a little bit different, but same concept. So here from iOS, we select application, single view, and hit next. Here we name it auto layout. And here for organization, same thing. Here we have the new feature, which is we can select this language, Objective-C or Swift. We will talk later different tutorial for Swift, but for now we'll talk about Objective-C. If you want to develop an application, you should know both languages. If you have some concern if I should start with Swift or Objective-C, it's totally up to you, but if you are hired in any company, they probably have some previous code for Objective-C and you should support it. And also there are some points that we need Objective-C, so you better understand Objective-C code and then you go to the Swift and try developing. For now we just stick with Objective-C since we start with Objective-C, and then we will talk about Swift and how we can develop application with Swift. And right now Objective-C and device iPhone, and we don't need core data. This is for database. For now we will talk in future tutorials how we can define core data, and then hit next, and then we can create our project. That's it. So let's go back, and here's our project. We can go right away into main storyboard and see it's a little bit different from Xcode, previous version of Xcode, and you see it's a little bit bigger, actually a lot bigger. And at the bottom of the screen you see width is any, height is any, so we have to define our shape. So what kind of device we want to support. If you click on the top of the view controller and until this borders goes to blue, becomes blue, you will see on inspector element, attribute in inspector, you will see size and it says inferred. Let me just change it to iPhone 4.7 or whatever size you want, but for me I want to develop an application with which is support 4.7, which is iPhone 6. And as soon as I did this, it will become the size of iPhone 6. I can do it for iPhone 6 Plus, which is 5.5, and it's much bigger. So put it 4.7 and you're ready to develop. In this tutorial we'll not talk about code and anything, we just talk about the layout, and we won't write any single line of code. Okay, let's add a label inside of this screen. Each view element needs 4 constraints. First, X, the distance, the horizontal distance from the top left corner. Y, vertical distance from top left corner. Width of the element. Height of the element. So we have to define 4 constraints for each view element. There is an exception for this rule, which is for intrinsic view sizes. This label and also this button have intrinsic size. Why? Because, for example, if you have a label, dynamic label, it's Xcode job to recognize the length of the string and then calculate the width of the string. So if we define any constraints for width, it will cut off, or sometimes it does really messy stuff. So we don't have to define any width or size for intrinsic views. And intrinsic views are labels and buttons. So don't use any width and height constraints. They need only X and Y constraints. So let's get rid of this button. I want to add this button on the top left side of the corner. And as you can see, when I approach the left, it will show me these blue guidelines. And also if I go to the top, it will show me some blue guideline on top. So I will leave it here. And now I want to define some constraints. Why we define constraints? Let me add another label here. And it's in blue guideline. And now if I run the program, it will show me label. Let me call it label 1. And this one label 2. So if I rotate this view, so you can rotate it with this simulated matrix. If you click on the view element, view controller, and make the border blue, on the inspector, attribute inspector, you can see you can change the orientation. Right now it's inferred. You have to put it to landscape. And as soon as I do this, where is my label 2? So we have to define a constraint in order to have our label 2 on the left and bottom corner of the, right bottom corner of the screen. So let's put it back to the portrait. And now that's why we use constraints. Right now, in order to define a constraints for X and Y, we just need X and Y because, as I said, it's just a label and it has intrinsic size. We go to this button, which is called pin. This one. And open the window for it. And you'll see these, it's kind of like springs. But it's actually your view, and you can define the constraint for the top space, left space, bottom, and right. So for our view, we just need the top space and left space. But just remove this check mark, and then never use any pixel number as much as you can. Just avoid. Stay away from defining some pixels because it would be different for different sizes and different screen resolutions, for example for retina display, for ordinary display. So just don't use magic numbers. So use standard value. Instead of 16, use standard value, and also use standard value for the top. So by this we define Y, and by this we define X. We want standard value from the left and standard value from the top. So we don't need width and height. So see, this is the width and height, but we don't need to define anything. And now as soon as I say add two constraints, we'll talk about this update frame, but just let's add this two. As soon as I add these two constraints, this label will get orange or yellow border, and we can see what is the exact error or warning. If we show the document outline with this button, we can see this small arrow, yellow arrow. If I click on this arrow, it says expected X equal to 20, but right now X is 16. What should I do about it? We have multiple options. If I click on this triangle, it gives me some options. First, I can update the frame. Update frame means that it will move 4 pixels to the right to make the X equal to 20. Or I can update the constraint. Right now our constraint is 20, But if you update the constraints, our constraints would be 16, which is the same thing that we have here. So we don't want to update the constraint, we just want to update the frame. And the recent suggested constraint is the option that Xcode will calculate, and it gives some constraint by itself. It's not always working. It will just assume that you use blue guideline and it adds some constraints. It's not working all the time, so I suggest don't use this. Most of the time you use update frame and you just fix it. Just when I press fix, you just look at this, it will push view to the right. So it pushed it to the right. Now we don't have any error warning or anything else. So let's go back to here. We'll do the same thing for label 2. We go back to the pin. This time we want bottom. We want to stick to the bottom and to the right. So stick to the bottom, use standard, and use standard here. See, you remember I said you have to remove this constraint to margins. Remove it, then it will allow you to use constraints. Use standard value. You can use standard value and then add 2 constraints. We can do again, going here and fix it, because right now it expects x equal to 298 and but actual x is 302. We can do something else. As I told you, I will show. If we want to define a constraint for here, I just put Ctrl Z to remove the constraints. And again, I have to uncheck this. Add the standard to the right and to the top. And now update frame. It's right now none, but it says all of the items or item of new constraints. So we just update this frame. And once we add these 2 constraints, it will stick to the bottom, and also it will show the right space for this view. And now if I rotate the view orientation, put it to the landscape, right now I have label 2. So this is good. It means that we actually define a constraint. We have more complicated views. For example, it was just a label and it doesn't need width and height. But what if I add a custom UI view? Let's drag a custom view here, and I will get the background color to black. Then you can see what's going on. As soon as I make it close to the left, it will show blue guideline, so I will use blue guideline, and I will wait until it show me the top guideline. See, it snapped to the top. It will stick to the top, so I'll put it here. I release it here, and then I want to define some constraints for this. I want to be, at first it should be a cube, so I don't want it as a rectangle. So I will go to this, but this pin button again, press it. It will show me the constraints for top. So the constraints for top is use standard value. Constraints to the left, it's grayed out right now, but as I said, you can uncheck this and use standard value. And then we need to define width and height. Whatever width and height we want, we should put it here. For example, I want it to be 150 by 150. 150 by 150. So it would make a cube. So if I update frame, we can select item and new constraint and put for view constraint, and as you can see, it will shrink until it becomes 150 by 150, and spacing from the label standard value, spacing from the left standard value. So now everything is blue. So we don't want yellow constraint. For example, if I add a button here, and I try to put it here and just add a constraint for height, standard value. See, right now it gives me an orange. Everything is not blue. So what is this dot 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 and dash lines? It means that because I didn't define an x constraint, it will add 0 for x, and this is the place that when we run the program, it will show the button here because it doesn't have x constraint. But as soon as I define a constraint for this, it will recognize and it will add it to the right place. So let's add different kind of constraint. Right now we just add x, y, and width and height. There's another way that we can add constraints based on other view elements. For example, I want this button exactly in the middle of this the x position of this box. So I just control drag from this button to the view, and it will give me different elements. So I don't want center y, this is for vertical. I want center x. So I want this button to be in the middle in terms of x. So I just put it and it will become blue. So that's why this is as simple as it is. So let's put another view element. Let's add, for example, a label in the middle of this box. Let me just make this label white so you can see what's going on. The color white. So first of all, use blue guideline to put it in the middle of the box. So right now it's based on the blue guideline, it's in the middle. And then in order to, you want to define constraints that it's in the middle. Just control drag to the view, and so it is center y, and you can see because we have not defined any constraint for x, it will give the x 0. So I put it here. But next time we say control drag to this view, and now control center x. Now it gives a blue constraints. So it means that we are good to go. Okay, sometimes you want your view to be exactly in the middle of the screen. So for example, for activity indicator, just put it in the middle of the screen and try to use blue guideline. So this is the place that I have to add my activity indicator. So it's a little bit hard to see, so just zoom in. And in order to put the constraint, you just control drag to the whole view and say center horizontally in container. So we add this constraint because it doesn't have x and I'm sorry, it does have the x constraint, but it doesn't have y constraint, so that's why I put y equal to 0. Now we add y constraint, but control drag again to the container and center vertically in container. And now our activity indicator is exactly in the middle of the screen with the all constraints. So this is the other way that we can define constraint for view element. Sometimes you want a view, so let me just add it instead of talking. You have a slider, you put it in the screen, you want it all the way, let's put it in underneath this button. Yes, use a blue guideline to see where exactly you should put in terms of space. And then you want it all the way for the width of the screen. So just put it, expand it until the blue guidelines show you the exact place. Okay, now again you go to the pin, this button, pin. Now first uncheck this and use standard for the left, and we also need use standard for the right because it's all the way to the left and right. So this one, and also the top space, the space between button and the slider, use standard value. So we have 3 constraints. So because we defined the X position width by defining these 2 constraints, we actually defining a width for this view, and it has an intrinsic height, so we don't specify height for it. So again, we have to define 4 constraints for each view element. I'm just repeating because it's very important. X, Y, width, and height. So we defined X by this. We define Y by this. We define width with these 2 constraints, or this one, because it says okay, it should takes all of the width of the screen. And we don't define height because this is an intrinsic view and it knows how much slider should take for height. So I'll add these 3 constraints, and we see it's yellow. So let's go see what's the problem. As I said, we should click on this and then go to this way, yellow, and it says expect width to be 335, but its actual is 339. Because we use blue guidelines, sometimes we make mistake, and it can fix it for us. Let me zoom out a little bit. Okay, update and fix. Now it fixed it. So it maybe moves 4 pixel, 2 pixel, whatever it takes. Sometimes we need to define a constraint that says, okay, I want the X position of my view to be exactly equal to the X position of the other view. So, for example, I want to add a switch that it has the exact position of the X of this activity indicator. So I use a blue guideline to do this, and a vertical space, and I just control drag to this view, and it says, okay, what do you want? We want the left constraint or right constraint. So we want it left because we want the X position and left side of this activity indicator. If we want the right side, we would choose right, but here we choose left, this one. And now it needs a Y constraint. See, as Y equal to 0, so that's why we should see, okay, what is the Y constraint. So we can go to the pen and say the Y position should be standard size of constraint. So let's just remove this and using standard and add the constraint. And now if you notice, we don't define width and height because switch also has intrinsic size. You don't specify height or width. It already knows how to calculate, and that's it. We can do the same thing for top constraint and bottom constraint. For example, if I add the image view here and shrink it a little bit and try to see, I'm trying to use a blue guideline to put it the top position exactly with the top position of this activity indicator. So I use a blue guideline to add this, and then I control drag from image view to this view, and I release it, and I say okay, top constraint for the top. And now it needs the constraint for, see, you put the X, it needs constraint for X as well. It was the constraint for Y. And we can say it so with this, because we have error. If I zoom in, it says that it needs the constraint for X, and also it needs a constraint for height and width. But let's just add the constraint for X. We need to use pin because we want the standard size, standard space between the edge. So use pin and uncheck this and use standard, and this is for X. But still we need the constraint for width and height. Right now the height is 0, see? Expected height equal to 0. We don't fix it this way because it would add, see, we have a triangle, but it would add height and width equal to 0. Always see what is expected and then fix it. Otherwise it would maybe do crazy stuff. We have to define a width and height. So let's define a width and height for this. By this pin, we can say, okay, we want this to be, we can set standard value because there is no standard value for image view. It's not intrinsic. I can say, okay, I want it to be 100 and 100 for this. And I want to update the view while you add in the constraint. So it adds 100 by 100, and the constraint for top is equal with the activity indicator. That's it. If you look at a button next to pin, you would see this button, which is called resolving auto issues. Let me just zoom out, I can see resolving auto issues. And if I click on it, right now everything is gray out and it's disabled, but you have to click on a view to see some of the options. And what is it good for? You can just clear all of the constraints of this view, or you can clear, for example, the constraints of this view specifically. If I click on this view and then go here and say clear constraints, it will just clear all of the constraints of this view. So you won't see any blue constraint here. And if I click on this view, the control view controller, and clicking on this clear constraint, this view clear constraints, it will, as it says, it's all views, and it will clear all of the constraints of the view elements inside of this view controller. So these two options are sometimes handy if, for example, you added some constraints by mistake or anything and you don't want to go and click on each of them and delete one by one. But this is good for clearing all of the constraints. And see, if I click on this and clear, sometimes we need some reset to suggested constraints. This is an option if you use a blue guideline. Most of the time, I can't say most of the time, but sometimes it will add a good constraint for your view, but I don't suggest it for example, some views that are not intrinsic, because sometimes it adds some constraints that are not good. So it's better not to use it, but this is an option that you would have it. For example, if I said reset to suggested constraint and I add this, see what kind of constraints it will add to this. It put the constraints of this and this height, and these are the crazy constraints that may not work in different orientation or different device size. So it's better not to use in these constraints. Let's Control Z. We have another option. If you remember, when I wanted to add this view in the middle of the screen, I use Control drag. The other option is using this. If you see, it's called align. If I click on it and use these two constraints, it would do the same thing. It would add the view in the container, in the center of the container. And I can say, for example, I want to, it should have, for example, 5 pixels to the left of the horizontal view, and it will specify 5 here, but because we want the 0, it exactly within in the middle, it will add it here. So this is the other way to add in the constraint and aligning actually. For example, if you want to have a top edge, so we did this for this view, top, left, right, you do the align button and add your constraint here. The last thing that you should know is that if you click on this document outline button, and you can see all of your constraints under this constraints category, and if you click on it, it will show you highlight this constraint. For example, this is a horizontal space, so you would see if I go down, it will highlight this, and as you can see on the attribute inspector, or this one, you can inspect your constraint and change them or do whatever you want. You can add priority. For example, if two constraints are in conflict sometimes, and you want to have a priority, you can set it here. It's very complicated. It's for very complicated views. If you're designing something simple to medium, you won't use this priority, so don't worry about it. You can just use your constraint, as I said. But it's just good to know that all of your constraints are here, and you can inspect them if you want, or you can remove them by putting or hitting delete button. And that's all for auto layout. It's very important to play around with this auto layout because we have right now different device sizes: iPhone 4, iPhone 3G. It has the same size. iPhone 4, iPhone 5, and also 6 and 6 Plus. So you should know the constraint and auto layout. It's really simple to understand, but you have to play with it to get familiar and feel comfortable. So until next time, have a good day.